On the 5th of June, 1975, a heavy-set man with a shaved head and shaved eyebrows walked into Abbey Road Studios carrying a plastic shopping bag. He wandered through the studio corridors without anyone stopping him. Pink Floyd were inside, putting the finishing touches on their 9th album. When the man walked into the room, none of them recognized him. They assumed he was a crew member or someone from the record label. It was only when David Gilmour looked more closely that he understood who the man was. It was Syd Barrett, the man who had named the band, the man who had written their first hits, the man they had stopped picking up 7 years earlier. Roger Waters began to cry. Syd Barrett had never really left Pink Floyd, even after they stopped picking him up. He was there in The Dark Side of the Moon, released in 1973. The themes of madness, of minds breaking under pressure, written by Roger Waters with Syd, always somewhere in the background of his thinking. He was there in the anxiety that ran through everything the band produced after 1968. The question of what they owed him, of whether what they had done was right, of what had happened to their friend. By 1975, Pink Floyd were the biggest band in the world. The Dark Side of the Moon had spent years on the charts. They were recording a new album that would eventually become one of the greatest records ever made. And almost every song on that album was about Syd Barrett. Shine on You Crazy Diamond was a 26-minute suite, written specifically for him. A tribute to a man who had been everything and had lost it all before he was 22. Roger Waters wrote the lyrics. David Gilmour wrote the opening guitar phrase that has haunted listeners ever since. Wish You Were Here was about him too, though Waters later said it was also about the music industry, about absence in general, about the feeling of being present and entirely alone simultaneously. He couldn't always separate the two. On that morning of the 5th of June, 1975, Syd Barrett had not arrived at Abbey Road by accident. Earlier that day, he had visited the office of the design company that made Pink Floyd's album covers and asked where the band was recording. They told him. He walked there. The band had not seen him for 7 years. What they found bore almost no resemblance to the person they remembered. The dark, curly hair was gone. The eyebrows were gone. He had gained a great deal of weight. He was wearing a gabardine raincoat and carrying a plastic bag. He was 29 years old. He sat with them for a while. He talked, though by most accounts the conversation was difficult to follow. He brushed his teeth at one point in the middle of the room for no apparent reason. The band played him the mix of Shine on You Crazy Diamond, the 26-minute tribute written specifically for him with his name in the title, built around the story of his rise and fall. He listened. He showed no sign of recognizing that the song was about him. When Roger Waters asked him what he thought of it, Syd Barrett said he didn't like it. Then he left. Later that day, he wandered into the EMI canteen where Gilmour was holding his wedding reception. That same day was Gilmour's wedding day. He stayed for a while, ate some food, and then left without saying anything to anyone. It was the last time most of Pink Floyd ever saw him. Wish You Were Here was released in September 1975. It went to #1 in both the UK and the United States. 900,000 copies were ordered in advance, the largest advance order in the history of the record label at that time. The critics were divided. Some heard it as a masterpiece. Others found it cold, overlong, too self-indulgent. But Shine on You Crazy Diamond was almost universally recognized as something exceptional. a piece of music that captured a specific kind of loss better than almost anything else recorded in the decade. David Gilmour later said, "I can't sing Wish You Were Here without thinking about Syd." He said this 40 years after writing it, and the tense had not changed. Gilmour also ensured quietly and without announcement that all royalties from Syd's work with Pink Floyd continued to reach him for the rest of his life. Syd Barrett never asked for this. Gilmour never discussed it publicly. It was simply done. Syd Barrett lived quietly in Cambridge for the rest of his life. His mother, Winifred, died in 1991. After that, he lived alone in a semi-detached house not far from where he had grown up. He painted, he gardened, he cycled. He occasionally went to his sister Rosemary's house to watch television. He was not, by the accounts of those who knew him, unhappy. He was private. He was withdrawn from the world that had once celebrated him. But he was not broken in the way that the myth of Syd Barrett sometimes suggested. He painted large canvases and then photographed them and destroyed them. He didn't like to be reminded of the past. When a television documentary about him and Pink Floyd was broadcast, he went to his sister's to watch it, then left halfway through complaining that it was too loud. Roger Waters saw him once more, briefly, in a shop in London in the late 1970s. They spoke for a moment. Then Syd Barrett went back to his shopping, and Waters went back to his. On the 7th of July, 2006, Syd Barrett died at his home in Cambridge. The cause was pancreatic cancer. He was 60 years old. His death was not reported for 5 days. No members of Pink Floyd attended the funeral. He was cremated at Cambridge Crematorium and buried without ceremony. His gravestone does not say Syd, it says Roger. If this story moved you, subscribe. There are more of them, and not one of them ordinary.